Mayor Wu, we were talking to Marcela Garcia the other day, who wrote a piece about you being in an unmarked police cruiser. There was reporting on this that with a siren and lights, and ended up hitting Yosmarie, I'm sure I'm mispronouncing her name, Pena. There was damage to her car. You were incredible. You got in the ambulance with her and rode to the emergency room to make sure that she and her baby were okay.
Speaking Spanish.
The mayor speaking Spanish, yes. I should say, the whole time, according to Marcela. The troubling, well, there are two parts of the story. One, it'd be great if you can clarify for us, because I don't know if Marty does. What are the criteria for when you're riding around and sirens and lights should be on? But frankly, much more importantly, Marcela also told us, we called her after she wrote the piece, and said her understanding is the city was in discussions with Ms. Pena. We know she's got a $1,000 deductible, $8,000 in damage, which I assume means that her insurance premiums are going to be going up. Both those things. What's going on between the city and Ms. Pena? And two, what are the standards, the criteria in effect for you riding around?
Yeah, Ms. Pena is an incredible lady, is a mom with kids in our school system, and I actually, in the course of our unfortunate meeting this way, but in the course of our conversation, got a lot of good feedback from her also about schools and everything else happening in the city. She's very involved, and
That's great.
We want to make sure that she and everyone in her communities and networks can stay plugged in. I'm just really, really thankful that everyone walked away from that situation relatively, physically safe, and obviously shaken up. And in the middle of that, it was actually, I've done ride-alongs before with EMS, with Boston Police, but for the first time, be in the middle of a response to a real situation and to watch how everything is coordinated and everyone has their own rules, that was actually quite amazing to see the professionalism and care with which everyone on our first responder team is trained. I'm just very, very sorry that I had to meet Ms. Pena that way. We were taking a left turn in an intersection and got T-boned. One lane of traffic had stopped, and then she was in the second lane of traffic further back, and apparently did not see the sirens. This is an area where this particular incident is being investigated by the department, as is routine for any public vehicles that come into any sort of crash. We have video from multiple angles that appears to show that the police officer who was driving our vehicle came to a complete stop and followed the protocols as laid out for use of sirens. And again, it was just a situation with the multiple cars and multiple lanes not being visible. I'm someone who, where possible, I think it's really important for our elected officials to be experiencing exactly what everyone else in our community is experiencing through the school system, through public transportation, and it's a fairly standard practice for what are called dignitaries, right? The dignitary protection team to activate lights and sirens to move through traffic smoothly when getting to a destination. Everyone else is stuck in traffic, and that is something that is unusual and I think should and is used sparingly. But the reality of being mayor, and one of the unique parts of this job, is that I do have to get all around the city in all different locations. On my calendar today, I have 8 different meetings everywhere from way low down in Port Norfolk all the way up to Charlestown, Dorchester, Mission Hill, and City Hall. And sometimes it is when there's an important commitment to get to, those lights and sirens do go on. It is not frequently, but it is part of, I think, an aspect of this job that I have to get places, and we are reviewing when and how to make sure that is always safe and appropriate as well.
But are you suggesting, when you said people in positions of authority within whatever, the police department or whomever, have looked at this, are suggesting that your car and the driver of your car were not at fault, and that there's no responsibility on the part of the city? Is that the conclusion we're inching towards?
There's a set of protocols that govern when and govern how sirens and lights have to be deployed when they are deemed to be used. around how you stop, how you approach, how you communicate and activate the different mechanisms. And so that is under investigation. But there have been there was one video that was leaked immediately that shows it from one particular angle. There are other angles that have been obtained that show other parts of how that happened.
But so there may be, I was unclear, but there may be no compensation from the city to Ms. Pena if the preliminary investigation is the hold. Is that?
I'm not sure about what happens in terms of the individual compensation and deductible.
Just one thing that this is according to Marcela Garcia's piece in the Globe, actually, that Ms. Pena told that when she wanted to participate in the police report, she wasn't interviewed for the police report, which I thought was really odd. She was the driver of the other car, but that's what she said. And she felt as though it made her look like she was at fault for the crash. Maybe she was, I have no idea, but she didn't. She thought the report was very convenient to her. And then she went down to the police station herself to report her side of the story, and the police didn't allow it. So it just seemed that there was not very gracious treatment of this woman when she went to the police department.
Yeah, my understanding is that she has been, it was very important, whenever I learned about that, to make sure that we could be in full communication. Again, through her eyes, I have now learned a lot more about what tends to happen in situations like this, no matter which two vehicles are involved, about the barriers that do exist, when for example, your car is towed, and then instead of just being able to go and retrieve it once you find out where it is, having to go to the police station and getting a release slip and this and that and the other, that is just insult to injury, literal injury, when you are in that, when that happens to you. And so there's a lot of lessons to be drawn from the situation, but I believe that she has been in contact with Boston Police, and we're looking at, in any experience that I have, I try to find the lessons that we can apply to the larger systems, even in this particular intersection. Since then, and since the news, I've heard from 3 separate people who got into car crashes exactly there in similar situations as well.
So it's your understanding that she has had a chance to give her version of events to the Boston Police Department?
That is my understanding,
Okay.
or at least that was going to happen. So I don't know if it officially happened yet, but that was something that needed to happen.
Okay, let's go to Donna in Charlestown. You're on with the mayor of Boston, Michelle Wu. Welcome, Donna.
Thank you. This is Kathy Kelly's friend, Jim.
Oh, Donna, it's so nice to talk to you. Kathy Kelly is the former president of the Boston Teachers Union, who is a very, very close, wonderful friend of mine. Donna, welcome. You're on with the mayor.
Oh, thank you. Hello, Mayor. I'm
Hello.
Donna O'Brien from Charlestown. How are you?
Nice to hear from you.
Thank you. My question is in regards to moving the O'Brien from the complex at Madison Park to the West Roxbury site. My perception is that there wasn't a lot of transparency in that move, or the decision to move. And I also am wondering if you might be able to share the rationale. I must say, I was reading the Globe today. If a kid goes to the O'Brien from East Boston, they have to commute 10 miles a day. And I just think that as a former high school teacher, I think that is really doing a disservice to the children in the city.
Donna, thanks for the call. It's good to hear from you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you for your years of service to the neighborhood and to the city. So I think a couple things to share about just high schools in general. This has been a key focus area of ours because when you think about the school system, this is, between pre-K seats and early education and high schools, those are where we see the greatest disparities. Elementary schools, we're seeing more availability in the right places, great access, quality of education and instruction. And then the older grades you get, there's a perception and a feeling that you have to walk a very narrow tightrope, get into the right sort of small mix of schools, otherwise look for other options. Every single one of our high school seats has to be a high-quality option. There's no other way that we will ever get to an equitable and fair and full opportunity for our students by tweaking this or that lottery process that applies to a small number of schools for a limited number of seats. They all have to have something to offer. They all have to be rigorous, supportive, and have wraparound opportunities. that means in a kind of macro kind of way, there had been a movement several decades ago towards smaller schools, moving to a K-8 model and a 9 through 12, and often taking our larger high schools, for example, in West Roxbury or in Hyde Park, and taking a larger high school and breaking that down into multiple small high schools in the same building, or even separating them out into other smaller buildings. We've now seen, over demographic shifts and enrollment shifts, the district is moving to a K-6 and 7 through 12 model in general. It is structured around how our high schools have been growing, for the ones that have seen enrollment stay steady or increase, and then other places where those shifts have been happening with population shifts. It's also, we want to guarantee that each one of our high school students has access to the full experience. You need to be able to have a whole range of AP classes and offerings. You need to be able to have multiple sports to choose from. And when they're very, very small school communities, you just can't sustain that kind of support or infrastructure because you don't have the scale to do so. The Madison Park and O'Brien conversation, first, I've heard this a couple times. There's been no transparency. Things have been decided without hearing from students or parents, et cetera. This is a feeling, Boston we're so lucky that we are one of the most engaged cities anywhere in the country. If someone believes that they weren't the first to hear something, they believe that everything's been decided and all of a sudden they were left out. It's a tough juggle. And just to bring total transparency to how we got to where we are now, which is just the very, very beginnings of the process and decision making, there was significant vetting that had to be done about whether this was even a proposal we should consider. Structural analysis of the building, understanding from figures who have been involved in the history of the development of the district and individual school leaders and conversations here and there, but it was not we had not fully opened up the formal community process and conversation until bringing it to the public all at once through the press conference to be able to get it out to people all at the same time. We are just now a couple weeks into that now, and there are conversations scheduled for alumni, for students, for all the respective school communities and more, and multiple committees set up as well. The bottom line is this. We have two high schools who are battling for space. The Madison Park Vocational Technical High School and the O'Brien Math and Science Academy have been jammed into the same complex for multiple decades now. They share athletic space for the student teams. They have been battling over academic space. And again, each high school student deserves to have the full experience. The STEM programs and offerings haven't been able to be fully developed because of space constraints at the O'Brien. Madison Park doesn't have the full offerings that they could in terms of vocational tracks, and especially the ability to have adults education at night with the full space that it needs, to have residents partake in the services, whether it would be a veterinary track or culinary track, to actually have that interaction with community members that other Voc Tech schools have the space for. And so giving each school its own space is really important to tapping into the potential of all of our students and giving that offering. The O'Brien, the last thing I'll say about this exam school is that it is the only exam school where they are only able to admit about half as many 7th graders as 9th graders. So they have a whole lot more students join starting in 9th grade. But unlike the other exam schools who basically you come in 7th, you get acclimated to the culture, you form relationships, you participate in sports, you go all the way through 12th grade, they cannot admit 7th and 8th graders right now to fill those seats. And so they need the space to do that as well. We're really excited about the possibility, but still fairly early on in the community process to vet everything.
One of the other
transportation
concerns
is going to be a major factor.
Well, that actually addresses what other people are saying, which is you're going from primarily a community of color to primarily a white community, and transportation is not terrific. So are you not concerned about a dramatic loss of diversity?
Actually, so on this point, in conversations that we've had with groups of students, alumni, school community members, everyone says about the O'Brien, the strength, the beauty of this school community is how they embrace diversity, how it's reflective of our school populations and how the commitment to really embracing and empowering all aspects of our students' identities, that is central to the identity of that school. And so that needs to be protected and preserved at a very minimum. And we would not do this if somehow that is at risk. The way that the exam school admissions process works now, there's a guarantee. In fact, the exam schools are the only schools where there's a guarantee for every socioeconomic background and geography to be represented in that school by the policies for admission. Every one of our high schools right now is already open citywide to students from every neighborhood. There are already students from East Boston going to school in Hyde Park. There are already students from Hyde Park commuting all the way to Charlestown High and stuck on the T. And so we would guarantee dedicated shuttles to West Roxbury that from East Boston to that location with a shuttle would be the same or even faster than what their students have to do on the T right now.
Deanna Pam had a great story in the Globe
Brilliant.
talking about high schools struggling, but there's one little aspect.
By the way, she's going to be with us next Thursday,
Yeah.
and hopefully the young woman who is incredible, Justice Porter, has written about, will be joining her as well, the student.
But as long as you're talking about neighborhoods, and lots of people have talked about neighborhood schools for years in Boston, there's been pushback because the idea you're going to have, the more affluent neighborhoods have the better elementary schools than the less affluent neighborhoods. But I thought this was a fascinating thing, which I did not know until I read this story, that when Judge Arthur Garrity did the busing back in the 70s, East Boston High School was exempted because it was so far away, and or East Boston schools in general. And in this story, it talks about how East Boston High School is the only traditional high school in Boston with a wait list. You probably know all this, but our listeners don't. 1,300 students. The largest traditional high school offers all these courses that other schools like the Burke don't. 5 AP courses, 5 arts classes, 3 world languages, dozens of sports. The school is predominantly Latino, has more than 90% of its students come from low-income households. They're learning English or have disabilities, yet its attendance, graduation rates, and MCAS scores have risen consistently through the pandemic. The reason I mention all that is because that is one of the strongest arguments for neighborhood schools I've ever heard, because you do talk about kids being stuck in the T, the distances they have to travel. One of the Brookline obviously is a much more affluent place than Boston. They're all neighborhood schools, so the parents know each other, the kids know each other, and this seems to, especially when these kids are mostly poor kids, seems to underscore that they're getting something from going to school a block away that the rest of Boston kids don't usually get.
There's a lot of good stuff happening at East Boston High School, and we were really excited to highlight that, in fact, this was one of the schools that had seen through and coming out of the pandemic attendance going up, test scores going up at a time when education across the country was seeing a lot of challenge and, in fact, the opposite statistics. That feeling of community ownership and belonging, participation, and predictability for parents matters so much. It also translates into facilities. And I remember several years ago when I was on the council and going around and spending time with as many school leaders as would give me a tour and talk to me, East Boston High School stuck out because there were other schools where they didn't have shades on the windows. The buildings were so old that back then some schools had classrooms where it was tinfoil put up so the light wouldn't shine in students' eyes at the particular angle. And I remember visiting East Boston High School, and they had beautiful shades in the school colors of their sports teams. And they said it was through a really generous local alumni and community group that donated to do that. And we can't rely on, a lot of times the disparities in our district happen because the schools that are able to offer extra programming do it, or better facilities make those fixes because they tap into the surrounding neighborhood for donations and for fundraising. We have to have a baseline guarantee of services, facilities across every single school, and to be able to offer that predictability. We've had great success in other parts of the city as well with creating dedicated pipelines where if you go to this elementary school, you're going to be guaranteed a seat basically at this high school. And then parents or families who are just starting off even in kindergarten already feel an affiliation for that high school one day and getting involved in that community. So we have a lot of work to do, but the high school side is where I'm very excited for the progress we're making. We're basically hunting down partnerships and resources, putting in place a facilities plan. We'll have more news in the weeks to come about other ways that local anchor institutions, whether it's our universities, hospitals, or companies or nonprofits, are really making even bigger commitments to picking a high school and deeply investing.
Speaking of school, we have actually a related question from Maggie, who is at the mic at the Boston Public Library. You, Maggie? Well, come on down, Maggie. You got to go to the mic and, yeah. Are you okay with that? You thought we were going to read the question? We're not. You're reading the question. Maggie, welcome. Thanks for coming. What's the question for the mayor?
Hi, Mayor Wu. Thank you so much. I was just wondering, so the school closest to us that we're hoping to get into doesn't offer K0, it offers K1. But this year, the school lost its credentialing for after-school care for 0, 1, 2, and 3, 4-year-olds. So it could only provide care for 5 and up. So the families we saw who were in K1 this year were told about this at the beginning of the school year and had to come up with a day-to-day schedule that changed where multiple parents had to take off days of the week in order to watch other neighbors' kids and do a very, I mean, I took a look at the Google Calendar they have going. It's pretty intense, which really made us question whether we would want to try to get into that school if we know that with 2 working parents, we would have to be a part of that situation. The Nathan Hale.
Okay.
And so I had heard, there's various rumors about, well, they might close it for this, they might do this, but the end of the situation was that there was no after-school care for the K1 kids.
So what's your question, Maggie, for the mayor?
Will you be making sure that all elementary schools can provide after-school care for K0 and K1 students?
This is yes, we're working on this, and this is such a source of, it's one of these mismatches where when we have a siloed approach, the people who end up falling through the cracks are our residents and our family members. I remember my older son got in off the wait list to their current elementary school, and so we started several weeks into the school year at that school. And then when we went and we were going to sign up for before and after school care because it was like it's a 9:15 start and 4:15 pickup, so you kind of need it on both ends of the day. Then we were told that all the slots were already taken, and so to not have the guarantee where everyone who's there, no matter what time of year you're arriving, no matter what age your child is, that is really important. Our Office of Early Childhood is working on this particular issue. I will check in on the Hale and see what the possibilities are for next school year.
Maggie, thanks for the question. Before we take a break, Mayor Wu, the other day Shirley Young was with us from the Boston Globe. She and we started a conversation 2 weeks ago about whether or not you can drive in bus-only lanes if you're not a bus.
No.
Well, 1 second. She was here, and before she came on Friday, Jackie Goddard, who's the spokesperson for the Department of Transportation, was here, and they have a discussion, and Shirley tells us, fortunately or unfortunately, I shouldn't judge it, there is no law against driving. We then asked the governor. The governor said, I believe you'll get a ticket if you're a car and drive in the bus-only lane, despite what we had just heard from Jackie Goddard. Now, you're saying, what the governor's saying is that you can't drive in a bus-only lane? What is the law? Do you know what the law is?
I don't know the exact provision of statute, but it is up to the city generally to enforce use of, so for example, just as if you parked for 2 hours in a 15-minute takeout spot, it's really technically, I guess, it's up to whether someone sees you there and puts that ticket on your windshield to enforce it.
But they're authorized to enforce it if they
rules.
choose.
Yes.
Are there rules that say that you cannot drive in a bus-only lane?
I will double check, but I believe the city has the authority to ticket for that as well. Do we have the enforcement capacity is another question, but we have seen, this is what, we're having conversations about street safety all across the city in different ways, and there are particularly dangerous road configurations. For example, we were talking a little bit about Center Street in West Roxbury, where it's a neighborhood business district, lots of small businesses with people trying to cross the street frequently. We've had crashes everywhere, multiple fatalities, and that two lanes of traffic going both directions, where the outer lane might stop and see someone crossing in a crosswalk, but the inner lane can't see around that vehicle. Some folks have said, well, why not just put a bus-only lane there and then make it one lane of traffic? We have seen that in other parts of the city where it doesn't always function as well as it would if everyone followed those rules, which just makes it more difficult to reap the benefits of public transit riders going as fast as they should, and buses being able to do multiple routes, and street safety overall.
Could one of your staff people let us know before
we'll
you're
follow
back
up
next
on that.
month? Great. Terrific. We had to take a break.
Yes,
Marjorie.
we're talking to Boston Mayor Michelle Wu. We're going to keep talking to her for the next half hour or so. You're listening to 89.7 GBH Boston Public Radio. We are broadcasting live from the Boston Public Library, streaming on Facebook.com/GBH News and YouTube.com/GBH News.
Welcome back to Boston Public Radio. Jim Browdy, Marge Regan, live at the library, streaming at Facebook.com/GBH News, YouTube.com/GBH News. If you're just tuning in, we're joined by Mayor Wu for Ask the Mayor at 877-301-8970. Last month, Mayor Wu, you gave us a plant. I have not killed mine, and it's 30 days, which is a record.
That's good.
What are you bringing? What'd you bring kindly today for us? What is this?
Okay, so these are extra swag from our Mayor's Office of LGBTQ Advancement's Pride activities.
You can hold them up.
Here we go.
We're just coming in, rounding out Pride Month here, and
Turn it around, too.
this was the first year that Pride for the People the Pride Parade was back in multiple years, and there's been a lot of great work happening through this office, whether it is engaging young people or focusing on housing that is LGBTQ senior friendly, or supporting our neighborhood organizations doing great work.
Let's go to, thank you for that, very kind of you. Let's go to CJ in Hopkinton. Welcome to the show, CJ. Hey.
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Thanks, Mayor. I think you're doing a formidable job, and I think you and Governor Healy are a force to be reckoned with. I just want to start with that. A bit of background, I had a business in Hopkinton. I had to close it post-COVID, and then I had a fire in my apartment and lost my home.
Oh.
So I went on to the CHAMP housing list and I applied. And I received notification in January of this year that I was successful in getting a place. In fact, I turned down offers in Watertown and Belmont for this development in East Boston. It's now June, mid-June, and I still have not got a move-in date. I'm living homeless. I tried everything to get back on my feet. I'm even studying part-time. But at 53, I found it impossible to get a job in the industry I was in. I'm invisible, But back to the housing, I just want to know, why is it taking so long? Every time I phone, or my advocate phones, having been told I've got it, I've seen the apartment, I'm still waiting. And no
just so I understand the situation, have you already given all of the documentation and paperwork?
Absolutely.
Okay,
Everything.
and this is one of the. Is it a public unit with the city, or is it one of the deed restricted units that's available through private?
It's mixed development, public and private housing.
Okay.
CJ, don't go away
Got it.
while the mayor is answering, please.
Yeah, we'll if you can stay on the line, and we'll get your contact information to check into this particular building and what the situation is. We will definitely look into it. I'm so sorry that lag is there. This has been one of my focus areas this year, is really for the city to slow down, to go faster, that in fact we are doing so much. We're adding more affordable housing. We are increasing and boosting the number of units that are affordable and permanently affordable through programs like this. But if the processes aren't working to actually get the units filled and get people into their new homes, we need to really understand if it's a staffing issue, it's a process issue, if it's a legal issue. So your experience would be very helpful for us as we think about how to manage the lotteries for the affordable housing developments, and also how we get these units occupied much faster.
CJ, do not go away. Stay on hold, and our colleagues will get your contact information, which we'll share with Mayor Wu's office. And thank you very much for the call.
We have a gentleman at the Boston Public Library, Mike, who wants to talk about homeless children, I believe. Is it Charlie?
Hi, Charlie. Welcome. Thanks for coming. A little closer to the mic, Charlie, if you would.
Okay. Hello, Mrs. Mayor. And my question is, why hasn't the city solved the problem of homeless children?
Thank you for bringing it up. It's one of those, how could we as a society tolerate any kids not having the basic necessities? I think the short answer is because the numbers keep growing and because the housing crisis is pushing out so many families. We have actually been expanding a lot of the efforts locally, including vouchers for Boston through city government for Boston families, working very closely with the school system so that when we identify our students and young people who are on the verge of potentially losing their homes, that we can help prevent that and plug them in right away. And then I will add also that, in fact, this year, our shelter system is more strained across the Commonwealth than it has, including in Boston, than it has been in quite some time, because especially with so many immigrant families coming in with the migrant crises, that many cities are looking to provide supports and resources for. We have had, for example, we'll hear from Boston Medical Center that on a particular weekend, it might be as many as 50 families who are waiting for healthcare services and shelter and to have some sort of relief, who are finding their way to our city. And so many of those families include young children. As soon as we can get them situated, we are able to get them plugged right into the school system and all that. But we hear that sometimes for families, it can take a year or plus to hear back from the federal government about whether they're entitled to a work permit and granted asylum status and all of the legal hoops to jump through. Once they have that documentation and those authorizations, they are well on their way and eager to, and are then filling key vacancies that benefit everyone in our society. But we see the need is very great and it's growing every day.
Charlie, thank you very much for raising the subject. We appreciate it.
You know, Mayor, well, we've talked a lot about some bad apples in the Boston Police Department, people that have been fired for stealing or for overtime they didn't work or for violent situations and so forth, and they've been reinstated over the years. This has gone on for many, many years. And we talked to you about, and arbitration is what has happened. They were fired by the police commissioner, and then the case went through arbitration, and then they were reinstated. And I know you have talked about before how you were hoping to avoid arbitration with the police contract and go to a civil service kind of deal. What I understand now is that you're in contract with both the firefighters, but mostly the police is what I was talking about, that you're heading toward arbitration, and the state is getting involved through the Massachusetts Joint Labor Management Committee, and it's going to go to arbitration. You've asked for things like having 911 calls diverted to alternative response teams instead of police officers, mental health kind of thing. So, number one, I don't understand why the state is involved, unless this is another home rule petition kind of thing where the state decides something that's unique to Boston or the contract that's unique to Boston. And number two, it seems like this is out of your hands, that this is just going to go to this arbitration board and they're going to decide what happens with this contract.
Yeah, the unique structure of our public safety unions in Massachusetts is that they are, by law, entitled to arbitration if there's a basically stalemate or stalling, if there's an impasse that has been reached in bargaining. We pushed very much to show that we believe there was still room for common ground and progress, but when one side really says that there's an impasse, you can't get out of impasse on one side alone, on the other side alone. So it does look like we are headed in that direction. We still intend to use arbitration and this mechanism differently than it has been used in the past, where we're not just going to bring proof or numbers or financials around what the salary should be and hope that they split it somewhere in the middle between the two sides and two positions, but really to bring forward the justification and the ask for some of the operational reforms that are tied into the legal language in the contract, for example, around arbitration for disciplinary measures or provisions around medical overtime or other aspects of health and wellness for the officers.
So the difference would be, you're saying it's just not going to be about money, it's going to be about the way the department runs.
Yes,
and
we
you think
believe
you
that
might,
all of that should be on the table even as we go to arbitration.
And you think you might have more success there, even though 2/3 of the time, or is it 3/4 of the time, one or the other? 3/4 of the time, the city loses and the union wins.
Well, we have to try something different, because what has been happening in the past has not been working. The reason, the way that it's set up, again, I hate to use this kind of confrontational language, each side, so basically the union and the city each select an arbitrator, and then the two sides agree on a third.
Yeah.
So it will be a panel that is thinking about this, and we intend to make our case with a lot of documentation and also a focus on how this actually benefits officers to be able to have more accountability as well.
Can I ask two police-related questions? We ask you every month about one cop in particular, a police captain, who's nicknamed Pepper Jack Danalecki by protesters. I think that's fairly obvious. 4 years ago, he was accused of using excessive force. Investigators determined he had violated the department's use of force guidelines and lied. And to quote the Globe, for 2 years it's been in a bureaucratic abyss. We asked you last month if there was any update. You said no update. Is that the same situation?
I do not have an update this month either.
Are you upset about this? 4 years ago this happened to this guy. He's had dozens of complaints against him, many of which have been around excessive force. He's never, no penalty has ever been around these excessive force things. And this is 4 years, and this is still just sitting there, I guess, waiting for the commissioner to do something. Does that concern you, the lack of speed and urgency? There
are, and you can walk into the commissioner's office and you'll see a stack of folders this high of different matters, including various items that come on his desk through different ways, and he's been doing a great job. Again, the bigger theme is not just try to be reactive and respond to what's in front of you, but change the system so that you can actually have more capacity and smoother process moving forward. So between the way he's been thinking about his administration and filling some of the key vacancies that have been missing there had not been an HR director for a very, very long time in the department, which was causing a lot of those to flow to the commissioner's office instead of through the civilian infrastructure. And so I know he's getting a lot of those pieces in place, and I have full faith in the internal affairs department that he is running and the decisions that are being made.
Do you ever say to him, I don't mean this it's going to sound odd, do you ever say to him, Commissioner, you really have to move it on this. We can't have these things sitting around for years despite how high the pile is? Do you do that kind of thing? Or
I like to really understand what the barriers are so we can help tackle them. I think having been in city government for some time, I know what happens when you say something has to move. You might be able to move that one little thing, maybe, while you're paying attention, but the real issue is what can we fix in the underlying system that will make it so that I don't have to track down every little thing, or it doesn't have to just only flow through when the media happens to learn about something.
Speaking of the cops, one of the reasons, my understanding is, why you vetoed the budget that was sent to you was because of a $30 million cut in the police budget. We learned this morning from David Leonard there's also a $1 million cut in the library budget, which he says would affect operations and their ability to provide services. What's the status of that? And by the way, is the library cut one you're concerned about too?
Yes. There were, just to back it up a little bit, we're in the second year of a new budget process where essentially the administration files a budget, the council files back their own budget, which can include amendments but must keep it balanced.
Yes.
And then it's back on the mayor to file basically a last and best offer back to the council, and then at the end of the day they take a vote to essentially choose between the last two versions that are on the table. We have now proposed our last and best offer back. They will have a meeting tomorrow to accept that into the record formally. And then next Wednesday, the last Wednesday before the end of the fiscal year, June 30th, is when the council hopefully would take action to make sure that budget happens. The amendment process this year resulted in, at first it was going to be $75 million of additional items that the councilors wanted to fund with corresponding cuts to allow for that. They ended up not passing it that first week and delaying it by a week, and then sent over $52.5 million in amendments. Again, they had to find the cuts somewhere because that's just how the budget works. And so when we ended up seeing counselors wanting to, for example, add more resources for rodent control, but then because of a large $10 million item somewhere else, they had to pull money from inspectional services to fund that. So the department ended up being underfunded, even though they wanted to increase resources for it. So it was a very large package of amendments, and to pay for something of that scale, it was inspectional services, public works, transportation, library, veterans, police that ended up getting cut significantly to provide room for that. Mm-hmm. So we have restored those cuts. We don't believe that we need to make progress on new initiatives and big ones, absolutely, but it can't come at the expense of maintaining basic city services and providing what our residents need most of all.
Are you concerned about the racial divide on the city council on this vote? My understanding is it's all the councilors of color and one white councilor in the 7 votes, and all white councilors in the 5. Is that right? And if I'm right, does that concern you?
When you look at the numbers around what our departments need to maintain the services at the level that they are at, to make sure that Boston continues to be one of the safest big cities in the country, a city that is actually investing more in childcare and basic infrastructure like schools and streets. To me, the numbers speak for themselves, and the budget that we have returned to the council does accept some portion of amendments. I think it's about $3 million that we were able to accept that cover many of the items that were a priority for the council. But we have to have something that balances and that also prioritizes our function of core city services.
I thought the extra $31 million that you didn't take out of the budget would help you with the cops, but you're in arbitration anyway, so maybe it didn't work. I don't know. Alan in Jamaica Plains, thank you for calling.
Welcome, Alan.
Hi. This is Alan in JP. Let's see. I was an early supporter of the mayor because she promised to empower us in the community and listen to us. And I'm calling about the Arborway Yard in Forest Hills. And I'd like to thank the mayor. She listened to us very closely on Friday at Mozart Park, and we appreciate that. And at that time, we said, here in Forest Hills, we're doing a lot of hard work of what makes cities work. We're taking the things that a lot of other places in the city don't want. We've got a major multimodal transit hub. We got thousands of units of workforce housing with lots of affordable coming. We've got hundreds of new substance use disorder beds coming, and we're welcoming the MBTA's $1 billion 200-bus Arborway garage and their MBTA HQ2.
Alan, what's the question?
And this
please?
area,
Alan.
Yeah, I'm getting to it. I'll be right there.
Sure.
Okay, it's a desert here of services that we need, and we've worked with the city on that site. And we have an MOU promise from the MBTA and the city that we're supposed to get no less than 8 acres for transit-oriented development. And we're just asking the mayor that she please honor the MOU, the Arborway Yard MOU. And we're going to be at the Boston English on the 22nd of June with the MBTA. And that's what the community is going to be saying. Please honor the MOU for the Arborway Yard.
Alan, thank you.
Thanks, Alan. In fact, Alan had created or handed me a really clear and easy to understand flyer about the different parcels. The Arborway Yard, as he's describing, is state land, but the city, our Public Works Department, has a small chunk of it in the corner, and Alan was saying that if that could be made available for the state to actually relocate all the way to the edge, then the rest of it could be opened up in a way that made much more sense for affordable housing and open space. And so I handed it to the right people within the administration to take a look at it. We want to be as creative and responsive as possible in thinking about how the leverage that we have, the spaces that we are able to use or shift or change can actually further that bigger goal. So I will get back to you as soon as we hear back.
Can you give us an update? We've discussed with the governor the last couple of months here your rent stabilization proposal on Beacon Hill. 2 months ago, I said to her it's essentially dead. aren't you troubled by the fact that legislators who have nothing to do with Boston are going to kill a proposal that the mayor, the city council, and 3/4 of the people in Boston want?
Some of the huge landlords.
She said, exactly right, thank you, the Globe, for that reporting. She said, I don't accept that it's dead yet. We'll talk about it next month, which we did the other day. We'll get to that in a second. What's this? Have you spoken to leaders? Is there any hope for your proposal, your rather modest proposal, I think most people would say, of getting a majority of votes on Beacon Hill?
I haven't gotten a clear no, so that's,
Okay.
that's something. I mean, the legislature is in the middle of their budget process right now as well, and so most of the other big ticket items are going to have to wait one way or the other until after that is resolved. The piece that we do have that's in the middle of the budget process is the MBTA board seat, which was filed by the House through the budget officially, and so that is actively in conversation
Giving
and
Boston
negotiation.
a seat on the
Giving
board.
Boston a seat on the MBTA board to have
Which
direct
is
voice in
so
governance.
ridiculous that you even have to ask. I mean, the state running
Okay.
everything in Boston is just really going to
Yeah,
give
that's
me
what we want to-
a heart
Can
attack.
we talk about
My
that for a
head's going to
minute?
explode.
Oh, on that, you're in a tough position because I assume you have to be relatively nice to the legislators. But
You don't, Jim.
I asked the governor the other day about would she be interested in trying to help get rid of this home rule stuff, where again, a person in Fitchburg, landlord or not, gets to decide what's good for Boston. And she said her response was, she says, it's just not something I'm focused on right now at all. I mean, it is the system that we have here, meaning home rule. Are you not frustrated by the fact that
No,
people...
she thinks it's great,
Are you
obviously.
are you not frustrated by this home rule absurdity?
So I'll give you a couple examples of things that we already have that are in that process, or that we have been able to get through that process, thankfully, but with tremendous effort that could have gone elsewhere, to redevelop and open up Jazz Urbane, which will be one of the first large-scale sit-down restaurants in the bowling building in Nubian Square. It's going to be incredible. We had to go and beg the legislature and take multiple votes to get a liquor license for that spot, for that building. Every time there's a major public housing redevelopment, we have to get a home rule petition so that we can manage our own bidding process and not have to go through all of the various pieces, and to streamline it a little bit because it's meant to protect against a particular thing related to private development, overwhelming, but this is a public housing development, so there's no risk of that, but we still have to get all the votes, and we had multiple go through last session. So we do have home rules that are going through, but they're on really, in some ways, common sense things. And then right now we have rent stabilization, transfer fee, MBTA board seat, and this is other cities around the country have more ability to sort of act on their own destiny. For better or worse, we are all intertwined here in Massachusetts. I think it comes out of the ethos of such active participation, and also the Brahmin Irish tensions back in the day that we are still under right now with the legislative structure. But I've had great success and better and better understanding of what the pressures are on the legislature as they're thinking about things statewide, and they've always been incredibly responsive to us under the current system.
Sorry, what pressure? I'm sorry to do this, so my apologies. What pressure is there on any legislator who doesn't represent Boston that Boston gets to decide, even if it was the worst plan ever? Why should any legislator decide what Boston does for the people?
And the liquor license is so unfair.
Okay, but
it's so unfair.
We're all going to go lobby. We're going to turn this into
right.
a legislature lobby.
We're going to have a big sign.
Okay.
Home rule. No
I'll give you
thumbs down.
Is there any reason? I understand that's what the Constitution says. Is there any rational reason, not legislative or constitutional, any rational reason why people outside of a community on Beacon Hill should decide what that community's leaders and its residents decide is best for them if it doesn't affect anything beyond their borders? Is there any reason?
So, okay, I'm really trying to pull myself out of my own views and to sort of take the, practice thinking from other people's perspectives. I would say probably the best argument is that we are, our kind of New England structure is also very, 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 what's the right word? the city municipal boundaries are much smaller and broken apart here than they would be in many, in other cities. Boston's boundaries would effectively encompass all of Cambridge, Brookline,
Right.
Somerville, the larger metro area. And we, through the quirks of history, are where we are now. And so you can imagine when there's so many little municipalities all close to each other, okay, fine. Issues don't stop at the boundaries. Bike lanes don't stop at the boundaries. Housing prices don't stop at the boundaries and suddenly change. And so there is some benefit to coordination, and we are trying, and I think having great success at really proactively pushing for that regional coordination. That might be the best.
Okay, so that was
I
not
think the
you.
mayor
That was
touched
out of
on it.
body.
It's the it's the
How did you-
Brahmins.
We want
the
the
power. We
Brahmins
want the
going
power.
after
Okay.
the allegedly big drinking Irish.
Okay,
I'm
that is
Irish.
what- that is
they were
what the
going to put out
history
too
is.
many liquor licenses
Okay,
in
last
every
question,
corner.
and then I'm going to drop it. Does the mayor of Boston, that would be you, by the way, does the mayor of Boston agree
For
with
another
what that
800 or
with what
something
that
days.
person just said about the rationale for home rule?
We have one of the most restrictive home rule schemes anywhere in the country. And, I won't be greedy and say that we need to have it all and remove every single one of those exemptions. But the irony is that the term home rule actually means that what only affects your city, you should be able to rule over. But how it's interpreted in Massachusetts is that our home rule authority, according to the Constitution, has 6 exceptions, 6 chunks that are taken out of that, including anything related to taxes and revenues, including anything related to private parties having a relationship like in a rental situation, right? So all of that gets pulled up, whereas other cities just have a much more broad home rule without those exceptions. And sure, where the state has issued a law, maybe the city can't override it, but where the state hasn't issued any law and it's just up for where the state hasn't acted, cities should be able to say what's best and make decisions that fit their residents' needs.
I feel much better now. Thank you, Ms. Mayor. It's great to have you. Can we hear it from Mayor Wu?
Thank you very much.
Nice to see you all.
We're sorry we couldn't get to all the texts and the phone calls, but we do appreciate everyone that tuned in. We've been talking with Boston Mayor Michelle Wu.
Will you join Lee Pelton and me when we're picketing State House next week? Are
I
you
think
free?
we need T-shirts.
She said she doesn't think she's free that day.
Not free that day. Okay. Coming up next.
Good to see you, Mayor. Thank you so much.
We
for
forgot to
coming.
ask the mayor about toilets in the city of Boston.
Oh, can you
Public
put that back
toilets.
on for 30
For one
seconds?
second, we forgot to ask. We're going to ask people about this coming up next. People complain about there's no place to go to the John when you're downtown.
We heard this about the Donna Summer Festival, too.
Oh, is that
Donna
true?
Summer
Yes.
Festival, the swan boats, and all that
So
kind of
how we
stuff.
doing?
So do you think that there is any more room for bathrooms around
Yes,
here?
there's actually locations that have been picked out, whether it's on the Greenway or other places. We have the system down. They can be self-cleaning. We just need the infrastructure and funding to make
Okay.
it happen.
Fabulous.
I
Thank
think
you.
that's something we can all get behind, raising money for more toilets in the city of Boston. Thank you very much, Mayor Wu, for being with us.